Today, I'd like to start a course talking about a book that isn't written. Uh, it's a history of the world, and of course, there's an awful lot that could be said about a topic like that. I taught the history of the world when I was a graduate student at City College, and then my first job out of graduate school, moving from Columbia to Johns Hopkins, was inventing from scratch a course on the history of the world and teaching it. And Philip Curtin was the department chairman. He hired me for the job. And after I signed on the dotted line, I went out and sat for a minute and thought, my God, what have I done? Because I was fresh out of graduate school and I had agreed to invent a course on all of history. Now, that's a little bit like taking a doctorate in the natural sciences and being asked to give a course not on chemistry or on biology, but rather a course on nature, where you cover all the disciplines in a synoptic way. So I realized I had taken on an impossible task and looked around for a way to figure out how to do this. And the best that I could do after thinking about it, because it's a daunting task, I decided to organize my history of the world around nature and theories of nature. This is what I mean by physics. All right, so what I mean by physics is not just the stuff that gets taught right now in a physics classroom at a university. What I mean is a culture's view of the external world, and these are modified over time, and different physical accounts of the physical world offer us different degrees of control over the physical world. So there are pragmatic differences between them, as well as intellectual differences. But it seems to me, and I know this is a naive idea because it's relativism reigns nowadays, but I still think it's correct, is that everybody's dealing with the same external world. That fire and ice are, for me, just like they are for you, wherever and whatever you might be doing with the rest of your life. Water runs downhill because that's the way it is. So human beings finding a way to accommodate themselves to nature, develop a subsistence strategy, and over time, finding ways to predict and then control nature. That's what my history of the world is about. But I extend that because, in my view, physics or natural science operates in human culture somewhat analogously to the way an operating system operates in a computer environment. In other words, all the applications are keyed into that operating system, which is to say, the understanding of nature. You can change the applications without changing the operating system. That's not hard to do and it's not unusual. But every time you change the operating system, in other words, every time there's a scientific revolution in history, that scientific revolution always demands a change in all the other domains of culture. Here I'm talking about what we might mean by the humanities. So law, politics, ethics, religion, art, criticism. A great many issues in the human sciences are going to vibrate sympathetically with changes in the natural sciences. The opposite is not necessarily the case. So my argument then is that for the whole of world history, we can chart the transformations in the world by beginning with the understanding of nature. And my understanding is that it goes through three phases. The first phase is what I call myth history. It's stories that people tell about the world. We might call this the default option. Every group of people wonder about the world around them, Children ask their parents why the sky is blue or what thunder and lightning are, and people make up stories to put the kids to bed. It's a sort of technology in that sense. For people whose understanding of the physical world is myth, religious ritual is an attempt to manipulate that world. In other words, it's a venture into technology. The downside of this technology is not very effective. And we'll call that myth physics, call that physics 1.0. Everybody's running that. And it's sequential. We layer these new accounts of the physical world one on top of the other. We don't completely eliminate any of them. So Science 2.0 happens in two places, separately and independently. This is the creation of a new, non-poetic, non-mythological science. And what that does is allow us to break free of poetry and myth. And this is what we're going to get about 600 BC in Greece and about 300 BC in China. Completely different sets of thinkers who came up with this new non-poetic, non-mythological physics independently. This is a big reason for why the cultures of Greece and the cultures of China are so sophisticated in their subsequent development. The Greeks didn't last very long, but it was a spectacular efflorescence. The Chinese, on the other hand, like the Romans, mastered the art of continuity, so their achievements were truly spectacular long after the Greeks had been eliminated as players in world history. Now, my history takes human beings as breaking out of nature, as becoming separate from, the various other hominids that we have. It starts at 73,000 BC. Now, you may wonder why I come up with such a strange number to start with. Well, the key thing is that a big environmental event happens. It's called the Toba eruption. There's a very large volcano in Indonesia. It erupted 73,000 years ago, and the eruption was so immense that it was cataclysmic for life globally. There was an immense die-off of animals and an immense die-off of plants. It put so much ash into the air that the earth in various regions, and particularly around the equator, or the equatorial and temperate regions, it dumped so much ash in the air that conditions were something like nuclear winter for a period of 5 to 7 years as that ash settled down. So, this is an immense explosion. Now, in addition to that ash, many chemicals get pumped into the air. Most important of these was sulfur dioxide. Now, sulfur dioxide combined with water as it precipitates down creates acid rain, and acid rain destroys forests, destroys vegetation. And they had years of this, so immense swaths of vegetation died, and that meant there was nothing to feed herbivores, or very little to feed them. Only omnivores have much of a chance here. But not only did the herbivores die, but of course the carnivores that depended on them also died. So this Toba explosion placed a great emphasis on adaptability and also on sheer dumb luck. If you happen to be located, whether you're an animal or a human, in some place where there's a way to eke out a subsistence, you're very lucky, because most people were stuck in places where, after they finished off the carrion and the various kinds of rotting flesh they encountered, there was nothing left to eat. No vegetation, no animals living on it. So this must have been a time of extraordinary hardship and misery. And, the human population of the earth was reduced to about 5,000 people. That's the size of a small town. Everybody that's alive today is descended from some of those 5,000 people. And what that means is that we have a bottleneck here, both genetically, but also culturally. Various kinds of cultural elements are going to be selected for. Like, for example, taking care of those who are hurt or sick, or solidarity with those who are in some way harmed or diseased. So there are certain kinds of selection that are going to be happening at the social level, and most of these 5,000 people are broken up into small bands, hunter-gatherer bands, familial, and a few others that are connected, but we're talking about 10 to 20 people. So 5,000 people means we're looking at maybe, 400 or 500 small, separate hunter-gatherer bands, each of them finding a way to maintain themselves and survive another day. So life was very hard at that Toba bottleneck. Now, for many thousands of years, the human population of the planet does not get all that much bigger. It stays low until, well, at least 10,000 BC. So let's say since the Toba volcano exploded 73,000 years ago, for the next, I don't know, man, that's about 25 or 2,800 generations. Let's say for the next 63 or 65,000 years, there was no appreciable increase in the number of human beings. They spread out geographically, and they helped eliminate other hominids and certain big megafauna, but they weren't at this point able to start what was needed to generate sustained population growth. It's not easy to be a hunter-gatherer. There are a few writers today that extol the life of the free, anarchic hunter-gatherer. That's mostly Age of Aquarius propaganda. The fact of the matter is that human life is difficult, that hunting and gathering exposes you to dangers in nature and dangers from other people. And nature is trying to kill all of us, and eventually it's going to succeed. The successful cultures are the ones that push back most successfully, so we don't get killed all at once. So hunting gathering as a kind of life is far from the idyllic noble savage that we get in certain authors that are just tired of civilization. This is an old perspective, goes back at least to Tacitus Germania in among the Romans, perhaps even older than that. But for now, I want to create a history that's affirmative. I want to create a history that says, yeah, we are better off now than we were before. Here's something to ask yourself when you think about the human condition. Are you better off than your grandparents were? I am, and I think many people are. I might be tempted to say that most people are. And yet we show very little gratitude for the things that our ancestors suffered and died and bled to give us. So there's an extensive entitlement which should be restrained by a sense of gratitude for what we have been given. Our ancestors died, our ancestors suffered on our behalf. So let us treat them with gratitude and respect. Now, there's going to be a big bump in population starting about 8 or 10,000 BC. And this will be connected to the emergence of sedentary life. That's much earlier than we used to believe. We used to believe that the River Valley civilizations, starting about 3,000 or 3,200 BC, were the beginnings of sedentary agricultural life. That turns out to be wrong, completely wrong, but for reasons that I can't explain to you now. We'll do it later on when we talk about that. But what is important is that we get a bump in population, we get a gradual, sustained growth, and then about 500 years ago, when the population of the, or rather about 5,000 years ago, when the population of the Earth had already climbed to about 250 million. At that point, we're going to see a big takeoff, because that's when we do see the sedentary civilizations of the river valleys in the old world, which will be supplemented by the civilizations of the new world. And within the last 500 years, that gradually climbing graph goes almost straight vertical. And in the last 20 generations or so, the last 500 years, the human population of the planet has gone almost straight up. And if we were looking at any other animal other than human beings, our immediate reaction would be to say that this last 500 years of time have been the period of greatest prosperity and greatest growth and development of any in the history of this species. And even when you include human beings, I think that's true. Now, we judge human existence and its achievements and its defects by more than simple biology. In other words, we're not just amoebas. But we're also not just less. There would be something seriously wrong with the human condition if we were getting fewer and fewer, sicker and sicker, and our lifespans were shorter and more miserable. So Steven Pinker, in a broad general sense, is right. We have a hyper-developed critical sense, and there's something to be said for that within reasonable bounds. But we have lost sight of the fact of how much better things have gotten over the last few centuries anyway. And the period in which the human species has flourished the most is the last 500 years, which is the age of Western civilization and its dominance. So it's currently held up to be the greatest evil in human history. I think exactly the opposite is true. It is true that lots of thieving and murder and butchery and rape and arson and the whole catalog of human nastiness goes on during this. I mean, there's no reason to deny it, because that's how people really are. The difficulty is that before the Europeans showed up, that was going on among the locals anyway. The idea that there's some people in history that wear the white hats and some that wear the black hats, there are some heroes and villains, it's not quite that melodramatic. Human beings are aggressive, but they're also compassionate. We're a Janus-faced species. And right now, the carrying capacity of the Earth has been increased by the development of modern natural science, such that 99% of the people that are currently alive owe their existence to the development of Western science and its expansion through the age of Western dominance. That's what keeps the world going. Without it, if we were to turn our back on it, if we were to abandon it, 99% of the people in the world would starve. So it's a one-way ticket. We can fall back, but the cost is of extraordinary human misery. And after studying history, it just seems to me like there's been enough of extraordinary human misery. I won't, in my discussion, get into an argument about whose atrocities are the best and whose are the worst, due to the fact that that argument is insane. Atrocities are atrocious, and they get done all the time by all kinds of people against all kinds of other people. The story of Cain and Abel is enacted many times in many places. We all have blood on our hands. The best we can do is to try and make things better, creating a future for our children where we can learn from the self-imposed misery that makes up so much of human history. Now, turning to the human species itself, there are different ways of thinking about it and describing it, but one that strikes me as important is that human beings can be thought of as machines that program themselves. If you take a mechanistic view of humans, you deduct anything like freedom or the soul or any metaphysical business. What you have then is something very different from all the other animate things creeping along the surface of the earth. These things teach themselves to teach themselves. And they take this self-instruction far beyond any other animal. They take it to the point where they invent symbols. And symbols and symbolism turn out to be unique to human beings. Other species, like the great apes, may be able to deploy them, but we don't have any evidence that they actually use symbols. On the other hand, when we see the first cave paintings, when we see handprints on those caves, those are symbolic references. And what those people have done is created the first art, the first religion, and the first natural science, which begins as one unified kind of lore about the world. Very primitive, but also revolutionary in terms of the amount of change it represents. So, as these human machines program themselves, it's a two-step process. First, we start out with very good hardware. The stuff between our ears, the brain, is highly adaptable, and it turns out to be highly malleable as well as being a very sophisticated logic machine. Okay. The software that we use to program that hardware is called human culture. And it doesn't come from anywhere else in nature but from us. So we are programming ourselves as we go on. And this programming is not exclusively at the level of the individual. We are programming at the level of the collective. And that's what culture allows us to do. Think of it this way. Much of human history has been the externalizing of somatic processes. Cooking food is the externalizing of digestion, makes it easier to absorb nutrients. What else would be an example of this? Creating stone tools, like a spear or an arrowhead. Nature has not given us very big teeth or very big claws, but we can create stone claws the size of a saber-toothed tiger's teeth, and we can kill animals with those. What we've done is externalize a somatic process, growing teeth or growing nails, which isn't adequate to our predatory inclinations. Another example would be the creation of symbolism, and from that, the creation of writing. What that does is externalize cognition and allows it to be separate from human mortality and also from human forgetfulness. What this means is that we can start accumulating knowledge, and over time this accumulation will begin to yield interest. So the brain and human culture are the hardware and software, and I have recently found out that it turns out that the brain is not fixed like a logic circuit. It too is malleable. It changes as it interacts with the external world. This modifies the synaptic architecture of the brain. And what that means is that there's a real physical, this worldly dialectic between brains and culture, between hardware and software. And each modifies the other on the fly in an ongoing process. This is a way of instantiating old German idealism without any kind of metaphysical fog. This is most certainly a dialectic between mind, if you will, and matter, between nature and human consciousness. And we get a big advantage in accumulating human consciousness when we figure out symbolism. I think it is likely in the next 50 years or so that we will externalize childbirth the way something like what we see in Huxley's Brave New World. Women, at least in rich countries, will no longer actually carry children. They can have in vitro fertilization, and then have some kind of mechanism carry it to term. I think it's highly likely. All right. These machines that program themselves, they also follow certain predictable patterns. And I think that's important in connecting history to evolutionary biology. In other words, there should be no discontinuity between the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences. And a history of the world that examines the history of nature and its applications might be that bridge. Okay? Now, human beings begin, or early in their history, with religion, but I don't have the capacity right now to discuss what it is that makes that so unique and interesting. I'll get to that. So I am going to talk about religion, but right now I want to talk about warfare. Particularly in Eurasia, on the Eurasian steppes, there's a group of people called the Yamnaya. They're a small pastoral people that are among the first to domesticate horses, and they also either invent or borrow the wheel. They put these two technologies together, and they create the war chariot as well as the wagon. It makes them far more mobile than anybody else, and they begin a process of invading in every direction because they're essentially unstoppable given the fact that they have war chariots. This is one of the first great military and also military transformations, but also a process of ethnic cleansing. They either drove these people away or killed them all. What this amounts to, and what other examples of human predation on others amounts to, is what I call PPP, pure predator parasitism. They are treating the people that they're killing as livestock, and they will kill them if they find that advantageous. And look, cannibalism is not to be ruled out as an option, but also after a considerable degree of sophistication is developed, they might find that it's more advantageous to sell people that they conquer rather than give them away, exchange them for things in a river valley civilization, or conquer the river valley civilization and bring some extra labor. Either way, it turns out that pure predator parasitism eventually finds its way into the great river valley civilizations. That's what's going to start the process of political differentiation and military expansion. So we're going to see in places like Mesopotamia a regular rise and fall of conquerors that come in from the steppes of Eurasia, and they last a century or two, and then they collapse, and then there's a dark age for a century or two, and then there's another invasion. Or sometimes there's an invasion, the invaders stay and get soft for a while, and they get invaded from the outside and are unable to defend themselves because they've lost that military edge. That's essentially Ibn Khaldun's theory of how Mesopotamian history worked, and there's some truth to it. Now, pure predator parasitism works for a while, works in an ephemeral way for river valley civilizations. But you see, Machiavelli at this point hadn't lived yet to give us practical advice about politics. Remember that Machiavelli says that it's better to be feared than it is to be loved, but it's very important not to be hated. These pure predator parasites, these people that treat the conquered, the enslaved, as livestock, as less than human as pure Kantian objects of heteronymous desire, and never as ends in themselves. This makes the underclass hate the overclass. If you look at the beginning of the Book of Gilgamesh, you'll find that he's raping the local women. Why is he doing that? Because he can and because he wants to. There's no suggestion that he's doing anything immoral. There's no suggestion that this is something that is out of the ordinary or strange. This is pure predator parasitism. The women and the men in the locality may not like it, but there's a very effective technology they have for quieting underclass discontent. It's called the bronze spearhead. They will put it through your chest, and that effectively quiets dissent. The difficulty is it doesn't make people hate you any less. It makes you hate people more, or makes people hate you more. Now, inevitably, because of their extra access to women, the elite in a River Valley civilization, the conquerors, are going to reproduce at a faster rate than the underclass. What that means is after a couple of generations, the skim that you can take that above the subsistence you need to give back to your workers is becoming less and less relative to the size of the elite. This is intrinsically unstable. Sooner or later, it creates either an internal civil war, or the internal civil war is prevented by an external invasion. But whether there's an external invasion or a civil war, the underclass, which is numerous and hates the overclass, is going to join with some of these parties to destroy the society. So if there's the elite is having a civil war, the minority, the ones who are in the process of losing, will make an appeal to the underclass. Come with us, we'll free the slaves, and you can destroy these guys. And often they will. The problem is that then they turn on the remnants of the elite, they destroy them too, and then the society itself collapses. Then you get a dark age. So the problem is this: pure predator parasitism is intrinsically unstable. All right, how do we fix it? Well, what you're going to have, since we've already domesticated the underclass, we have to find some way for the overclass to domesticate itself, because nobody can do it for them. And the way that is done is with the invention in the first millennium between, say, roughly 1000 BC and the time of Christ, of the great world religions. These religions thematize justice. Justice allows for the self-regulation and for the self-restraint of elite libido. There are certain things you don't do. And once the elite begin to restrain themselves, that reduces the hatred of the underclass. And that means that when there is a civil war or when there is an invasion, the underclass, who have been formed now into plebeians, are going to side with you because they have something to lose. They have bought into the structure you have. That makes societies in which the elite develop religious self-restraint much more durable, much more lasting, and that means that they have political order, and they have the division of labor, and they have trade, and they have the opportunity to mop up the other societies that don't have that coherence as they collapse, and they turn into the cultural domains of the great world religions. So religion is not dysfunctional. It's not a decoration. It's not like the fins on an old Cadillac. It's a functional thing. It's like, think of the way copper is. It's better than stone, but it's a soft metal and it has many defects. But when you get to the point where you can add tin to copper, then you get bronze, and it's much, much more durable and much more useful. So the alloy is what you need. Well, what politics needs is to move from pure predator parasitism, it needs an alloy of religion and justice, which gives the elite a vocabulary with which to restrain themselves. It's the origin of noblesse oblige, and this is going to be the origin of social coherence. So that's why these inevitably develop, and that's the function that they serve. So societies are all run by elites, but elites can limit their own rapacity, and that's what makes for social peace. It's also going to create social room for a new group at the bottom of society, below the plebeians, and that'll be the slaves. And so you can see some of the structures that will inform the history of the world developing out here. Now, I could talk about historiography now, but I'm afraid I've gone on too long. I'll finish with this. These are the epigraphs from my book. There are 3 of them. The first one is from Herman Melville, and it's about the unity of history. The big message of my history is that we're one species operating under different constraints. The differences between us are in some ways laughably minimal. 73,000 years ago, all of our ancestors would have fit into a high school football game. That's the whole of the ancestors of the 8 billion people currently living. I would admit that we have our differences and we have our competitive and violent tendencies, but we also have the opposite. We're a Janus-faced species. Read Mencius and his views of human nature. There's much to be said for that. I have a great admiration for him. The middle quote is epigraph is one word, ecce, and that's the caption to a picture by Bruegel, and it's a Hobbesian reading of the world of fishes, that big fish eat little fish. And that actually has largely been true. When groups of people become mobile, sometimes it's because of changes in climate, sometimes it's because of the die-off of various species they depend upon, but sometimes, and often enough, they're being pushed by people that threaten them with extermination. And that's true everywhere in the world. There's no place now, there's no place 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago that is inhabited by the people that were originally there at the beginning of, well, human dispersal across the planet. Everyone that thinks that they are locals to some locality are almost certainly not. And if you look at human beings' activities in new areas, what we find is that things that are easy to kill get killed. It's true for the people they find often, but it's also true for all the megafauna. Human beings are opportunistic predators. And finally, there's a great line from a Chinese emperor. This is a stela left by Nestorian Christians, the first ones to get to China. This is about 700 AD. And they brought with them what the Christianity, which is what the Chinese called the brilliant teaching. And they gave a reading to the brilliant teaching. The emperor said, well, assign senior mandarins to examine this, to have it translated, and to figure out what to make of it. The mandarins get back to the boss, and then the boss decides whether it'll be admitted and under what circumstances. And what the stela says, and these are the words attributed to the emperor, is that wisdom can be seen no matter who has it or no matter what they call it. And we've looked at this doctrine, and it is deeply impressive, and we're going to admit it. Now, here's what I would like to see, the reason why I put that there. First of all, I think he's right. But second of all, I would like to see a reciprocal, recognition from the Christians that adhere to the brilliant teaching. There's sometimes a failure of intellectual generosity towards ideas and religious traditions that deserve a better treatment and a higher estimation. There's much to be said for intellectual generosity, and it's a virtue well worth cultivating. And it's very clear that our highly cultivated Chinese mandarins were highly sophisticated people. They're a kind of paradigm for me. I really admire them. So these are the beginnings of my book. I will talk to you about them. We'll have some questions. I will see you all later. Bye bye.